Okay, right, I'll just spin up the stream and check that everything is fine there, and screen share on the Discord room so that we can have multiple levels of quality for people. So that will go live there. Working all things around, and we'll just jump onto Twitch on my channel here so that I can see the Twitch comments coming in, because OBS is having some issues with connecting to Twitch in the way that it was previously was showing me the Twitch channel comments. So now I've got the stream comments with a Twitch window open, which means I have a second. I can see that I am now live, and I can go morning. Oh, okay. So we are ready to go, and it's 2 minutes past. Okay, so today I'm going to present on group decision making, because now that I've put you in groups, you're now going to have to start working remotely in groups and making decisions, right? So I thought now would be a good time to talk about that. I also have another lecture, which I think I'll have to record this afternoon, on ways of interacting in groups, right? So kind of a different level discussion. But I thought I'd do this one today just to kind of get you into the mode of thinking about how you make decisions. I'll talk about higher level discussion techniques in the next lecture. Okay, so, and I'll just get that minimized, make that a wee bit bigger. So this is the group decision making. It's on the website under today's lecture. Okay, so I'll record and upload this to Panopto as well. So, today I thought we'd be able to talk about group decision making, and we'd have a look back over this the where we are in the course, because we've done the personas and we've done the empathy thing. We've done the tasks to define what we're trying to design. We've just done the ideate phase, and now we're moving into the prototype phase. Now, this ideate and prototype phase, so the creative and prototyping, usually is an iteration, so it goes round and around and around, and now we're moving into these groups, and so this is where we start having, like, you know, how do we do this prototype, ideate, and testing all together? Just checking that my audio check, everything's good. You guys can all hear me. I assume it's all good, unless you say otherwise on the stream. One of the things that we do when we're making decisions is that we're making choices, right? And so when you have multiple people coming in, particularly around a design idea, you have competing ideas with competing designs and options. Now, I've forced you into this situation by creating individuals to create some design ideas, and now we're trying to merge those. So how do we sort out some of these disagreements? I've asked you to do one of those processes, which is heuristic evaluation of each other's work / a cognitive walkthrough, so you do which one works better for your group, but you're going to disagree about which design is best, right? And there are multiple competing concerns. Some people will say, oh, you know, this will be harder to implement, whereas other people will say, oh, but it might be harder to use. So what might be easy to create might be hard to use. So this is these competing positions, competing perspectives are where you often get disagreements, and that kind of, how do we resolve, particularly now that we're not in a room, how do we resolve those disagreements? Oh, and I'll just note, this is the Wellington QR code sign-in app. I'll do a little bit of just below me there. I'm going to do a usability review of that during this lecture a little bit, and we can discuss some of the usability aspects of that app, and also potentially some of the usability aspects of the government app that's being released, which is already out but is officially released at 1 o'clock today. So we'll have some usability lectures on that, and I'll talk about those apps as part of a discussion on usability, seeing this is a UI course. Okay, so that's why that's there. So, types of leadership. So when we look at types of leadership, when we're putting a group together, there is a kind of dictatorial And that is the type of leadership where whatever I say, all of you have to do, right? You don't have an opinion, your expertise is irrelevant, I'm the leader, I'm the dictator, I make dictates, and that is what happens, okay? There is authoritative, which assumes that I'm the most experienced and the best person to make decision in the room, but I'll listen to what you have to say, and then I will make the decision. Right, so I'm not really consulting you. I'm saying, right, what do you say? What do you say? What do you say? Right, you say those things. Right, I still make the decision. It's all about me. I use that, and I use that in my brain to decide what I think is the right. So, and then I make the decision. Consultative is more where we actually put out. I suggest a decision, and I then consult with the group to say, okay, is this a reasonably good thing that we're planning to do? So, this is my plan ahead. You can give me feedback, and I will actually take that feedback and potentially change what the decision is based on the consultation process, right? So sometimes authoritative leaders will try and look consultative, right? Because, it's a pretend consultation. So they're actually just making the decision, and they're only doing the consultative step to make you feel like it's more participatory. And then you get all the way down to participatory, where we get to actually vote and we build consensus, where the whole group agrees about the way forward, and then we move. Okay, so you can look at different cultures, use different levels on these decision-making processes. Having put you all into groups from different cultures, there may be people in your groups who will go, well, I'm just waiting for a leader, right? And the leader will tell us what to do. In fact, I've been told by a staff member at Victoria University that the best way to run a group is to just elect a dictator and then do everything that person says. Right? And for them, that's the only way groups work. They've never been in a group that's been participative. And certainly there are some people who hate the idea of decision by committee. This idea that you have a consensus view, which means there's always kind of the second best view, because an individual plan might have a great vision, but once you try and satisfy 10 different people's opinions, you tend to rule out options and end up with the most beige, most conformist, least offensive idea, right? So there are pros and cons across all of these leadership styles. In fact, some say that the most efficient style is a dictatorial style, right? Because there is no need to consult or discuss or have all of that additional time where you get people on board. Is you just demand things and things get done. That is a challenge, particularly when we're looking at other students. All of you have equal status, and so we don't actually have a natural hierarchy where there is an obvious dictator. And so that's where we have potential problems, and where if somebody wants to run a dictatorial style, that's going to create significant challenges within the student group, right? So I say that you probably can't run as a dictator within these groups. You're going to have to be down at the participatory end. And that's where we start looking at consensus building and voting. So one of the things we could do, and hopefully there are a few of you around already, I can see that we have 20 or so people in the Twitch feed, all right, yeah, so Twitch has given me a transcoder. Yay, Twitch, thanks for a transcoder. Oh, okay, so there's GitLab link 404 not found. You might have to go, if you don't have the GitLab link, we'll sort that out after the lecture. So just looking at the comments coming in. Okay, so this, and I'll copy it to the stream. Well, actually, no, if you can get to the course website, right, then you'll be able to click on that link which is within the PDF of the course website. So what we're doing here is a process of dot voting. So one of the ways of getting people to give opinions without it, and kind of a lightweight middle of the road rather than giving a number, is what's called dot voting. It's become very popular in design, where the idea is that each participant in a decision gets 3 votes, right? So rather than just a single vote, if there's multiple competing ideas, a single vote doesn't feel like it's enough, but having to rank everything might seem like too much, right? So somewhere in the middle is this idea that you have dot voting, you give 3 dots, you come up with some ideas. Usually this is done in person. You write some ideas on sticky notes, you put them on a wall, you give everybody these little round stickers, and they can go and physically put stickers on a wall, right? Now, we don't like touching stuff that other people have touched at the moment, so we can do this digitally. And now that you guys are all remote, we look at ways of doing this kind of voting and feedback in digital ways. So one of the things I looked at was dot storming. And so if we go to that website, so you guys could, if you've got the Discord, I've put the link in Discord. You should be able to find it. I can put it in the Twitch channel if someone hasn't already done that. So now what I've got in this, if we go to that website, is that this is just one of the tools. There are many tools. So actually I've got the dot storming up here, but one of the neat things about the dot storming is that it actually, so yes, this is a generic forum, and I see, hey, we've got a whole bunch of, we've got some participants, we've got 7 of you have jumped in here. So when you jump in, you log in with a name, and you get to participate in these ideas. Now, this is particularly, you can see all of these ideas have my name attached to them, but because this is a participatory online voting system, what you can do is you can actually create and add a new card up here, right? So if one of you wants to, you can go up there, you can add a new card, and then we all get to vote on, and go 3 dots, and I can put, luckily put, and yes, you can do index. Well done, someone who worked out how to do that. Yep, I know. It is not entirely secure. So I can actually put all 3 votes on one area, or people can put. I see a lot of you have decided to put votes on me giving a lecture on medieval siege weaponry, and a lecture on memes, right? So the idea here is that this is just, throw up some sticky notes, so cards, so people can write whatever they like on it, and then all of us get to vote on which of these ideas they think is the best idea. Okay, so you can imagine if you've got some issues, some designs you want to discuss, you put up those issues on this board, and then people get to vote on those issues, right? And you get to see who created them. And this is very open, so yes, it can, it's a website, so it can be kind of to some extent. It doesn't deal very well necessarily. It's not highly secure, but this is a quick, easy, free way that you can do this kind of decision making. Now, partly this is decision making that is open and closed in a sense, right? Because what you can see here is I don't see who these dots are, right? So there's a level of anonymity on it. And this becomes quite important because often in group scenarios, you might have someone who has a thought but doesn't necessarily want to share it. So asking them to vote on things, particularly voting against the higher status individual's idea, is hard, right? So what you get is you want ways of having people provide ideas. Now here you have to own the idea you're providing, and then other people get to anonymously vote for that. Right? Now I get to see the vote I gave, but I see where things are generally popular, and you can also write comments. Those are named comments, right? So this is a very open system. So I can see 25 of you have come in here to see what this looks like. And Max has decided that he's found a way of making his name big. Well done, Max. That'll be just the I assume that's an H1 wrapper around your name. To make it a title. Would that be correct, Max? Probably. Something like that. So injecting HTML code. So the idea here is that this is a quick way of doing that. Okay. Now, one of the tricks of dot voting is to try and find that balance between having too much to do, which is rank every idea, and having too little, which is only vote for one thing. That's why they kind of come up with 3. It's not that it's a magic number, it's just a guess. You could do 5, there are other ways of, and you can do setups where I can change in here. I can do some of the settings and I can upload things, and I think I can lock the board and change the number of votes that people get, right? So that's dot storming. It's a quick, simple way of making decisions. Design people use it all the time. It tries to give a balance between anonymity and ownership over ideas. Okay, so thank you for jumping in there and being part of my voting. It does seem, I think, potentially randomly, that a lot of you like the idea of doing some medieval siege weapons as a lecture. I can give a whole lecture on medieval siege weaponry. So, and you know, I see that you have there are a few people who like the idea of a philosophy lecture, right? So yes, I can see there's a little bit of chat. Right, so I've enabled chat, I can disable that. So what we're looking at here is this group decision making. The idea here would be you'd put up some ideas, you'd dot vote. The group would say, okay, so the most important thing, linear axis, most important thing here is the medieval siege weapon, so we'll have a random lecture on that later in the course for fun. And there are some people voting here, right? So that would be a way of making those decisions. Okay. Another way of making decisions, which some of you may have been exposed to, is planning poker. So I can ask, and I don't know if any of you agree, but have you seen planning poker before? Have you played planning poker before? Either comment in Twitch or in Discord if you've seen it before, because it's one of the agile methods that is used. So planning poker, and you can I'll give a reaction to that in the Discord, add reaction, and we can have thumbs up or thumbs down. Maybe right, so planning poker has been discussed in ENGA 301. Okay, so here again, planning poker was designed around you sitting around a table with a pack of cards, and the idea is you'd put the card face down, everybody would vote first, and then you'd turn over. Now, this is decision making. Instead of saying, you know, what is most important, this is which is the voting thing we just did, and there are lots of voting systems. This is a consensus building tool, right, which is different to voting. Voting says which one wins, which was the most popular. This system is a let's all agree about the size or the importance or the relative ratios of things, right? So dot voting is about kind of, you know, voting decision making. Planning poker is about consensus building. Two very different concepts. So in your group, for some things you want to vote because you need a winner that you're going to do. For others, you need to build consensus about, you know, how big a task is. If you're going to break up tasks, right, and you can say, well, I'll take this task and you take that task, we'd like that group of tasks you take to be similar in size. And so you need some form of doing consensus building. So planning poker is on that end. Another consensus building approach, which some people use, which is you may have done as a child, I cut, you choose, right? Which is about me dividing the world up and then you choosing which of the two sides I give you, right? So if I've got a cookie and I cut it in half, you take half the cookie. If I make one size bigger, you're going to get that bit, right? So I have to so I'm motivated to divide it exactly perfectly. Planning poker is a way that we can do that, but with multiple people and building consensus. Okay, so if we now go to Scrum Online, you go to there. I have, right, I see a bunch of you have jumped in. So we've got a few of you. I have Simon too. I created my own, I'll rejoin. Let's see if I can actually successfully rejoin. Okay, so I think I've successfully rejoined. Yes. So, Scrum Poker, this particular version of Scrum Poker is something you can fork on GitHub. So the code is open source. And what we have here is I've actually linked this, and it gives you, when you create, if you go to Scrum Poker, you can create your own area, and it gives you a blank slide, and it allows you to connect to default, where I can just write in an idea, GitHub, and I actually put in a GitHub repo, and it will grab all the open issues out of that GitHub repo and then rank them, right? Because the idea here is that this is part of an agile process. You can also do it with GitLab, and you can either have your own server, or you can have your server and repo, and you can say whether it's private, which means you then need to put in your username and passwords and things like that, right? I do not guarantee that those usernames and passwords are safe. I assume they are. I can't guarantee that, so that's why I'm only using public GitHub repos rather than putting in my private information in here, because I cannot guarantee it's safe, right? So I'm not requiring you to give your password to a third party. If you're really worried, then yes, and you want to try this yourself, you might want to fork the GitHub repo and check the code and do all those sort of things. But while we're working open source, I will continue working in that way. So yeah, I've got half of people who about half of people have seen this before. Some of you are taking Inga 301, some aren't. Okay, so with Planning Poker, as the organizer here, what we do is I pick a particular issue. I press start on that issue, which is what I did. Now this issue actually comes from, and I can actually click on here, and it will take me to the GitHub repo, which is one of my NTNU, one of my Norwegian universities. The LaTeX thesis format is in GitHub, so that students can download it. And these are issues that we're trying to address while improving the LaTeX format, right? So this is where it came from, and because I've pulled it from GitHub, it's left the hash 16, which is the issue tag, which we talk about when we talk about smart commits, right? So we'll talk about that when we get into more of details around GitLab. But these hash numbers allow you to connect to specific issues, and that flows through into other interfaces like this one. Now, here what we've got is we've got 3 of you have made a decision. What you do is we look at and say, well, how big a task is this, right? So, and we have to define an axis. And so, me as a user, I would get to see this, which is PDF. And I have a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 20. And this kind of exponential kind of growth, right, is the idea that if I'm looking for how long something might take or how big this is, right? So is this a 1-day job, a 2-day job, a 3-day job, a whole week job, a week and a half job, a 2-week job, a month job, 2-month job, 5-month job, right? So kind of how big is this task? How long will it take, right? So here what we're doing is by each of us voting, and let's say I'm saying, how many hours, let's treat this as hours, how many hours would I take? Now, and this is something you have to agree, right? When you're doing planning poker is what metric you're using for these numbers, right? It could be how important it is. It could be how great the risk is. In this case, it could be number of hours. There are various ways that you play planning poker. So if it was number of hours, to add PDF indices to in the appendix, right? So I think making sure that I've got, because I know how this works, I think it's going to take me, I would vote for it 2, I think it's going to take me a couple of hours, right? And then I voted for 2. It's now showing green, showing I voted. Now, if I go back to me as admin view, I can see I voted, I can't, and 3 other people have voted. So if KC, Michael, E, Shiv, and S could vote, C, thank you, C. Now the idea is once enough people have voted, right, I can then reveal those, right? So now let's see, where does it go for the reveal? There is a reveal feature. Okay, I think once everybody's voted. So what I'll do is I will just kick in here and get rid of people who haven't voted. Just because I need to see what's going on. So if I could get people who haven't voted to vote, because what we're looking for is building consensus, so we're supposed to wait until everybody has voted. And at the moment, I'm just kicking out people who haven't voted yet because I need to get to the answer. First poll is concluded. Okay, so once everybody has voted, or I've removed people who haven't voted. Let's see. There we go. Now that I've removed everybody who hasn't voted. So what we've got here is this is the votes of those people who voted. And we have me at 2, Dominic at 2, C at 3, Hugh at 100, and C1 at 8. So the planning poker approach is then Hugh and either me or Dominic would discuss, and we'd be on Twitter or we'd be on Discord, and well, on Discord or on Zoom or whatever, we would then discuss why we voted for those two ends of the extreme, right? So Hugh would say, 100, it's massively important. I thought it would take forever to do. And, you know, we could say, well, actually, Hugh, we were talking about hours, so no, it's not going to take 100. And so I'd say, well, because I think this is a 2-hour job, we think that that's about how long it should take. And I think I think I'll be able to do it, and I think other people will be able to do it in 2 hours. And so we think it's about a 2-hour job. Okay? And then what we do, right, rather than saying, I'm right, because, you know, I made a decision, that would be putting me in an authoritarian role. I'm doing participatory consensus building. We say, okay, I think it's 2 because I think I need to do this, this, and this. You think it's more because you can see that there is also got to generate the PDF and you've got to do some of the sizing and scaling. And so we would then start again, right? And everybody votes a second time, right? So the point here is not that we just look at the first vote and then average it. It's that we look at the first vote, we see the extremes, and then the second time around we try and build consensus by everybody giving the same vote, right? So again, you get to go votes again, and then so Simon would go, oh, okay, so you've made me vote again. I think maybe I was on the lower end, so I'll go with 3, right? Because I think, yeah, maybe it was about 3. And then that has clarified that I have voted, C has voted, and if you, C1 and Dominic could vote, we can end the session. And so the idea here would be that those would all vote. We'd then turn over our cards again and all be able to make that decision. Now, of course, what you normally wouldn't be doing is you wouldn't be seeing me as Simon giving my opinion here, right? This is this is breaking how it should work. This phase, it should be anonymous, basically card face down until everybody's made their new vote, and then you turn them over. Okay, so this is a process of, again, decision making. Now, if and kind of consensus building. In this case, if I wanted to run a different one, I could click here and go, and I'll just, those people haven't voted yet, but, you know, you could see what would happen if they did, and I will kick them out because I'm being terribly evil. And you can see there are I can enable various stats to work out what's going on, right? And here I can also go, you know, if I started that, if I get rid of that one, it will turn those over. Now we've all heard, yay, it's all the same. So we have consensus rather than that one person being out, right? And, you know, then it will give me decision times and all those sort of poll counts. I could then change to poll and then start, and then you'll see a new different poll, and that will show up here as being better code listings. And again, we would do a vote. Okay, so Scrum Poker, Kinlink grabs the issues out. We then could use the Scrum Poker to decide the weight of those issues in the repository, which would then allow us to say, okay, how much work am I taking on? Am I taking on a fair amount of work? Because we've all agreed on how much work each issue is. Okay, so that's, again, getting a group to agree how big the tasks are by consensus building, rather than someone telling you how big a task is. You will build this consensus. And then it's fair when someone takes on tasks, if it's been agreed that that's how big a task is, you take that task on, you do that task, you get kind of credited with that amount of work. Okay, so that's a planning poker approach. Okay, so that's my working in teams lecture, which is going to be the next one I do. Okay, so this is about creating buy-in, right? Decision systems need to help with group engagement. If you are working in a group of equals, alienating individuals and having them refuse to work is going to cause significant problems. It's probably the biggest challenge of having university level group work is that it doesn't have a natural hierarchy where some person is obviously in charge, right? So these are why we need good decision consensus tools. The voting is a way of by showing people transparency in the dot voting, you get to see that everybody sees that this is a group decision, right? That the group voted for this. Hidden votes are remarkably challenging because it's hard to know and trust that voting system was not rigged in some way. The planning poker, again, we all agree, we build consensus, right? So, because one of the challenges is if you just do voting, it sometimes feels like a competition. It seems like my idea was the most popular, rather than we agreed together on a level of importance for each of these ideas, okay? So this, unfortunately, both planning poker, which has a single number, and the dot voting, which people have to agree on what a vote means. Because you saw, so with the planning poker, is this an hour or is it importance? Right? So those are two very different axes. One is how achievable something is, and one is how important something is. Right? Those are very different ways of thinking. And so whenever you ask people to vote on things, right, to do dot voting and give you three options, you have to tell them what a vote means. Is a vote for importance or is a vote for difficulty? Right? Because something might be really important but very easy, or really important and really hard, right? So the vote could mean a different thing. And that's when we start saying, well, maybe we need to own multiple votes, maybe we need to have multiple axes. And so when we see that happening in society, these two-factor ideas, and then you start building into many, many factors. But so you could have a two-factor where how urgent an issue is to solve versus how important it is, right? So urgent issues, so usability issues that have a high risk or something that needs to be done first, you might say is very urgent and important. Everything in that top urgent, important category, you're going to do that. Things down in the not urgent and trivial are going to be the last things to get done, right? So there's this kind of center line where you're going to do things so things up here definitely get done, things down here don't. And, non-urgent but important things versus trivial and urgent, these you kind of have to decide what is the balance that you do around the middle zone here. You see this particularly and very commonly at the moment, people asking for risk analysis matrices, right? So when you look at a usability issue, or you look at an error, or you look at the tasks that need to be done in a project, you start saying, well, what are the risks associated? What is the likelihood of something going wrong? And what is the severity? Right? So if I was asking you to build consensus around the tasks and a usability issue, I could say, how likely is this usability issue to occur? And on another axis, how severe is this usability issue? Right? So when we talked about those heuristic evaluations, remember we talked about 0 to 5 on criticality? Having you as an individual make that decision, okay, that's you. But now we've got a group having to do an evaluation. How would we get those axes right? Well, one way would be to do something like dot voting or planning poker to build consensus around the size of risk and the likelihood of that risk. Or you can just use a standard voting where you give it a number 1 to 4 and then just average those, right? So those are two different approaches. You would need to comment about what was your approach to building agreement within your group about those values, right? Because you're expecting somewhere between 2 and 4 people to be evaluating a design. And so I want to see how you came to an agreement. Perfectly fine if you just said, well, we ranked it 0 to 4 and then averaged those. That's perfectly reasonable way of doing consensus. But it is, the process here is about showing that you have thought about how to build consensus. Okay? That's part of the documentation, is how did you do this? So with user evaluation of usability challenges, you can thought of the probability that the user will encounter this when you're doing heuristic evaluation, and the level of severity. Okay, so those are two axes here. Low risk, improbable, we don't do much about it. Extreme, it's intolerable, it will destroy your interface, and it's kind of it will occur to everybody, right? So these are extreme risks and things you would have to solve. This also gives you colorization, and it uses a multiplicative system. So this is 1, 2, and 3, and this is kind of 1. So it 0 acceptable, right? But here is the probability. So you can see it's gone 1, 2, 3. This is 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Right? So it's kind of doing a 3 times 4 ish to get to 12. So you rank these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So these two being 5 or 6. These are kind of the ranking order, which are not quite the multiply these numbers together. Otherwise, you'd get some similarities, right? Because you'd have if this was 3 times 1, this would be 3 times 1, and so you'd expect 3 and 3 there, right? So this is the numbers here have been chosen in this order to rank them between 1 and 12. Okay, so that's kind of a way that you might build one value this way, one value that way, and then have a different way of interpreting the combination of those two. Okay, and there's those are up to you how you do that evaluation. Okay, so as these are a couple of ways of doing decision making, we've looked at scoring and the summary that you might come up with. So once you've done that and you've come up with these multiple axes and you've come to a consensus, you can do an allocation of score to each category. You have some sort of algorithm or agreed upon process of merging scores. And as I said, you could just use an average. You could use this consensus building. And you have to kind of understanding parametric scaling. So this idea of having things done at different levels. So you can have planning poker that goes 0, a half, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 9, and these sort of numbers. This is saying these are not. I can't just have I'm not just going to do linear. I'm not going to say category 1, category A, B, C, D. I'm going to give those numbers, but I give those numbers that are wide enough to express more than just a linear thought, right? So you have to start thinking of some kind of non-parametric and parametric scaling, because averaging it's really important, it's not important at all, or it's important we go the other way. How you average those, that becomes a challenge, right? So we don't usually just use averaging. You might need to find other ways of building consensus. And the last thing I was going to talk about, because I was going to leave some Q&A and I was going to do some review, is hygiene factors. Okay, so what we've been looking at here in making these decisions has generally been agreement. Hygiene factors, there are certain things which destroy usability not in a linear way. So what do I mean by hygiene factors? Well, in cooking, a hygiene factor is this idea that it doesn't matter how good a meal is. If it makes you sick, it was a bad meal. Okay, so hygiene is this kind of threshold effect. It's not that being more hygienic makes the meal tastier. It's that it makes it safer. And that once you get to a particular threshold of it was safe, doing more of that thing doesn't help. So, for example, if I'm cooking and I clean my knife between each time I slice a tomato, right? So I take a tomato, I make one slice, I go away, I clean the knife, come back, another slice, go away, clean the knife, come back, make another slice. So I'm increasing the hygiene factor here, right? I'm making it more hygienic. It doesn't make my tomato sandwich taste any better by washing the knife between every slice, right? So there's a threshold as I've made it hygienic now, I don't need to do more of this once it's clean. Okay? Now, at the moment, we're doing this whole COVID-19 thing, where we're washing your hands regularly. Okay? I don't need, if I've washed my hands, then I don't need to wash my hands between every slice of the tomato. Yes, it's more hygienic, but it doesn't improve the outcome. Okay? And they talk about not touching your face. Well, if you've washed your hands and you've washed your hands effectively, yes, you can touch your face. But the problem is you don't want to go outside to touch some stuff, then come back in and touch your face. You need to wash your hands to increase that hygiene factor and get over that threshold. And then once you're at the threshold, you're okay. Okay, so thinking about some of the decisions you're having to make in your group, you may want to have these kind of hygiene factor veto options where you say, this is an issue, it's a significant issue, and it's not one that will make our design better, but we have to have it. Okay, so security on login might be considered a hygiene factor. If it's insecure, doesn't matter how good the interface is, it's not secure, right? And that could be a project killer. Okay, so that's one of the things that when we start looking at things like the government's app for COVID-19 tracking or the university's app for COVID-19 tracking, there are certain hygiene factors like security of the information. Doesn't matter how pretty the UI is, if it's not secure and that you can't trust it, you shouldn't use it, right? So those are the sort of things we can start talking about. Okay, so I will then go and have a look at the chat. So do we have questions? Has the site broke? Yes, so did the site break for someone? I'm assuming it did break because we're saying did the site break? Who's assigned to the issue, right? Because different people might have different skill levels, so a task might take someone longer or longer than you. Right. Okay. So the question here about planning poker and size of tasks. Okay. So this is important to understand. In planning poker and in deciding the size of a task in your group to do, how do you deal with people who have different skill levels? This is a critical aspect of working together and making a decision. In planning poker and the idea of weighting things in, so if you have a look at GitLab and we jump into a GitLab, that's my GitLab.com. If I go to my standard GitLab, in GitLab you can allocate. If I go to here. And we look at something which is not so risky. We'll look at Daniel's VR project. So in Daniel's VR project, we have issues. Oh, he hasn't created any issues. Okay. Daniel, you should have created issues. But he didn't know I was going to look at his work. So I'll have a look at, I know I put some in my Sparky. So in my Sparky project, there are a bunch of issues. And if we have a look at these issues, you've got new issues. And down here, you have this idea of weight. Now, it doesn't say number of hours, it says weight. Okay, so here, when I edit the weight, I can put in a number. Now, the reason it has weight rather than hours is because it knows that I might take a different length of time to solve a problem than someone else in the group. So rather than describe everything by the amount of time it will take you, you give it a weighting. Now, giving it a weighting means that how big is this task? How complex is this task? What that means is that when we finish doing our planning poker, we then have a how complex is this task? Given that I'm a more experienced developer and I can do things more quickly, I might be able to generate a certain level of complexity per hour. I might be able to process 2 units of complexity per hour. A novice might generate half a unit of complexity per hour. Therefore, when we vote, what we're saying is how big is this task? Not by number of hours, but how complex it is. And once we've agreed on that complexity number, we then go away and do our work, and we find out that I have a higher velocity, it's called in industry. So I generate more value into the project per hour because I'm a more experienced developer. I've got more experience using the tools, or I'm faster at programming. And it's acceptable that people work at different velocities. We expect new novice users to have lower velocity and experienced developers to have higher velocity. So rather than try and work out how many hours a task is, we work out the size a task is and then accept that, yes, our star developer, who is potentially being paid more, is expected to have a higher velocity. Right? Now, you as students, probably there isn't much of a difference between your abilities. potentially. And so you might be working at similar velocities, right? So the amount of complexity you add to the task is similar, right? But to get over exactly this question of, yes, but it will only take me an hour and it might take someone else 5 hours, right? The answer is you agree on a complexity for different tasks. And yes, it takes one student 5 hours. It's not the number of hours that you do that's relevant. It's the amount of, it's the quality of the work. If the work is high quality and you do it in an hour, that's great. If the work is high quality and it takes you 5 hours, that's fine. You've still achieved that level of quality, that amount of complexity and functionality that has been added to the project. Okay, so that's why we have a difference between weight and hours. Now, as students, you initially, it is very tempting to think of everything as hours spent because it's much harder to kind of understand that what we're doing is we're adding some level of human independent complexity to the project and functionality of the project, and how do I assess that? And that's why you don't see like 1 hour written next to these, right? And that's why we have weight, not hours in GitLab. And you can also in GitLab, when you have weight here, you can also do time tracking where you do estimates, right? And so I can estimate a length of time, and that's separate. So the estimate of time tracking is separate to the weighting. And that's because this is about complexity and time tracking is about logging the number of hours spent by an individual. Right? Now, in a completely open system, you would pay people according to the amount of complexity they add rather than the amount of hours they spent at work. Right? So it'd be the value of the work you do, not the cost of the work you do. So the value is how much you add to the project, the cost is how long it took you. So currently, unfortunately, we mostly pay people according to the cost of their time rather than the value that they add. In computer science terms, sometimes you do find that some companies will be looking to pay people according to the value that they add to a project rather than the cost that they have. And that's where you get consultants and you get differential pay and those sort of things, right? But that becomes quite a long philosophical talk about what it means to be working in a group. So one of the things that we try and do is we try and build consensus in the group. We accept that people work at different velocities. You then have to decide, okay, I know that some of the group is able to do this faster, but if they're able to do it faster, they do it faster. They then go away and do other things while the rest of the group do it at a slower velocity. And that's acceptable because we've been able to generate shared value rather than I've just tried to make sure that you're sitting in the room with me for the same length of time. That discussion becomes even more critical when we're talking about this form of interaction where I can't see that you're sitting in the office and working, right? That it becomes the value that you add that becomes more critical rather than just the length of time you sat in front of your screen. Okay, so as a group working remotely, this is partly why we start thinking, how do we move to this agreement on the amount of complexity, the amount of work that needs to be done, rather than just purely the number of hours you sit in front of a screen. Okay, so that's one of those critical decisions you're going to have to make. You're going to have to work with your team to start building that idea of trust in the agreement on how hard something is, and then, talk about how long it took you. Perfectly reasonable, right? So yes, I spent many hours working on this. It was really hard for me. The answer, well, yes, that might be. But it then has to become some sort of balance between hours spent and value added, right? Because you have to then agree that, sometimes the estimates are wrong. And that means you have to improve those, right? You have to change your estimates. And so it's always about finding that balance. Okay, so any other questions? Otherwise, I'll stop the lecture on group decision making, and then I'll shimmy over into discussing the university app as a usability discussion. If I show you my pin, it will show you that, but I can show you that I'm using my fingerprint, and that's fine. Okay, so if there are no other questions about group decision making, hopefully that was interesting and valuable, and that some of you will get some ideas on how to manage allocating tasks, and certainly agreeing on an evaluation for the prototypes or the designs that you've got coming in from assignment 2 while you're doing the first part of the project. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll